Hello, Rinpoche. Thank you for teaching. You said that emotions are illusory, and someone asked this question during the break too, and Aspi's answer was good, but I still have a question. If you look it up in the internet, it says that emotions are glands, secreted in the brain that produce specific emotional states. So a sort of scientific friend was arguing that emotions do exist physically, that they're part of the body. So I couldn't give a good answer, and I was wondering what the answer is.
I think the word emotion may be not the right word, not the right translation, but this is what we have been using. So to use otherwise probably might cause more misunderstanding. I think this is an important question. Of course, this is definitely based on the Sanskrit term. So let's keep on using the word emotion, but let me define this. When in Buddhism, defining the emotion, when we define the emotion, the Tibetan word is tsuljin maimba yila cheba. Tsuljin maimba yila cheba. Now this is going to be kind of a long answer because it's important question. So I'm going to dwell on this a bit. It's related to also what we are going to be discussing within these chapters anyway. Tsujin Maimba Yila Jeba literally means mind or mental factor that sees or that perceives Tsuljin Maimba Yilachaba. Tsul, the word tsul is, the Tibetan word tsul means as it is. Tsul, as it is. Tsul jin, the word jin is as it is, as. Tsul, as it is, tsuljin. So a mind or the mental factor that sees not as it is. We can't really use the negative word, and that's important actually to establish the term. Mind that, I could say, of course, I can, if I'm lazy, I guess I can say mistaken mind. But to be more precise, mind or the mental factor that sees not the raw truth, real as it is. That is the definition of so-called emotion. So, you see, for instance, when you have a desire, with this desire, when you interact with object, you see something that is not real. You have already made a decision what to see. When you have a desire, even though you are looking at something maybe not that nice, you will interpret this as something good and something desirable. That's why mind desire is what we call tsujin maimba yila jeba. That's why desire is emotion, afflicted emotion, let's call it. Deluded emotion, deluded mind. Anyway, mind or mental factor that distracts you from the truth is how we define the emotion. But this is also a very generic way of explaining the emotion. And this is also important because many of you are very aware of I'm sure you have heard the term samsara and the nirvana. If we don't know, if we are not well informed about the sort of the function of emotion, we will never really understand samsara and the nirvana. In fact, the whole concept of the samsara and the nirvana exists based on function of the emotion. To make it more easy, more let's say, to put it in a more categorical sense, this is we sort of divide the emotion into three categories. There's a nyamo bhikkhuni nyamo, which is ignorance, the emotion of ignorance, and then we have lejikuni nyamo, emotion of karma. So in this case, as you should make a note that karma is very much part of the emotion, and then chevikuni nyamo, which means emotion of birth or arising, birth, or effect, birth. These three can be elaborated into 12 what we call interdependent co-origination. I'm sure some of you know, some of you may have seen even the iconography in the Buddhist temples where you have what they call wheel of life, and then on the outer rim you see these 12 different iconography, beginning with a picture of a person with a blind person, which is not knowing, the ignorance. So let me explain this. For instance, this is how the Buddhists think. When first you interact with an object, with this subject you interact. Let's say my eyes at the moment is looking at strawberry. No, actually, even before that, my eyes is just looking at something. Before the strawberry, I'm looking at something. I'm hearing a noise. I'm feeling the warmth. I'm tasting betel nuts. I'm tasting the sugar in the tea. All this, as I interact, the first thing that happens is not knowing or creating an automatic assumption. So when I look at this, I immediately make a decision that this is a strawberry, because that's how I have been conditioned to think. I'm a human. Human beings are told that this is not a marigold, but this is a strawberry, so on and so forth. And then there's much more misconception about strawberry. Strawberry, when I look at this strawberry, almost all the time, I see it as it's in totality. I never see in its parts. When I look at it, I don't see the atom, the ingredients, if you like, or the parts of the, I don't think in terms of its seeds, its skin, all parts of this, because if you think about that, then the whole notion, the existence of the strawberry deconstructs. So it's in our habitual mind, we see this strawberry as a one and often permanent, independent rather than dependent, and usually truly existing. So these are the mistakes we make. So that is the first emotion. And then after that is what we call the emotion of karma. So I want strawberry. I thrive for strawberry. I look for strawberry. I struggle. I even create battle for strawberry. I try to get it. I try to differentiate. All sorts of distinctions arises. And then either I get it or not get it, depending on different cause and conditions. I will have an effect. If I get it, the effect of having got a strawberry and chewing the strawberry, swallowing the strawberry. If not, really, getting frustrated for not getting an strawberry, so on and so forth. These three, so that's the birth or the effect of getting the strawberry or not getting the strawberry. So these three is, if you like, the component of what we call samsara. This three gives birth to each other also. So hypothetically speaking, you can say the first one creates the second one creates the third one again creates the first one. Because you have the reaction and you look at the reaction, again you have a wrong view, misconception, which then creates the action, which then creates the reaction. So this goes on. And this goes on systematically in a very organized fashion. And this spinning of this is what we call samsara korva, which means going round and round. Now, let's say if you are dealing with a machine, if you take out one component, let's say a nail or even its speed, the speed of its rotation, if you pause it, even for a minute, even for a moment, it does have an effect on its circling this machine. And this is what happens during so-called practice such as meditation, generosity, patience, samadhi, wisdom. What these things does is it disrupts the flow of the circle of these three, or, as I said, 12. You can elaborate this into 12. Now this also tells us something else. Just for the sake of communication, going clockwise is samsara, and trying to go anti-clockwise is the nirvana. Okay, let's put it this way. But what we really want, what is the real aim, is never to move this will at all, anyway. We don't want to, of course we don't want to go clockwise, but we also don't want to go through anti-clockwise. For the time being, we try to make the will go anti-clockwise just because we don't want to get caught up by the game of going clockwise. You understand? Otherwise, you have the misunderstanding, you create the karma, you create the action, then again you get entangled with this action, more ignorance, more more ignorance, more action, and more effect. Go round and round. So-called the dharma practice, which is trying to go anti-clockwise, we only apply temporarily so that we will stop this will from spinning. Ultimately, we don't want the whole will. We don't want to be even within the will. This is why if you go to the temples, you will, in the iconography, the Buddha is always painted outside of this will and pointing at the will, saying that this is the so-called life. Actually, if you ask Buddhist, what is definition of life? This is the definition of life. This is so-called life. These 3 or the 12 spinning, clockwise or anti-clockwise. Of course, for most of us, clockwise, because of habitual pattern, strong push and pull. Okay, so this whole thing is an answer to what is really emotion. Now, one of the element of the question is that emotion exists within our brain and within our what was it? Cell and gene and all of that. If you talk like that to a Sarvakayana and Mahayana Buddhist school, probably they may refute by saying that so-called cell, gene, whatever, physical component of us is actually no other than your own mind. You know the classic, especially Mahayana. It will come actually, I think, in the next chapter. This is what Śāntideva was actually even labeled as a Yogacharya Madhyamikan because of this shloka. This shloka is quoted again and again. Yogacharya and Madhyamikan believe that everything is your mind. Object is your mind. Of course, subject is your mind. Cell, the very notion of cell, does not exist independent from a knower of cell, gene, all of that. So from the Mahayana or the Sarvakayana point of view, they may say that there is actually no physical, externally, independently existing phenomena called cell or gene or elements, etc. Now, even though this is not really the right time, just because the question is quite important, I like to just share this. Now, if you are talking to Tantra, they might say, yes, oh, fine. Emotion is cell, emotion is gene, emotions are element. Fire, water, elements, and there's what was the later part of the question? I forgot now.
I guess I just wanted to know how, if you're saying emotion is illusion, and it's also can be tracked by scientists as a function.
Yes. I think again the term illusion is something that we need to discuss here, because you see, when Śāntideva said emotion is illusion, or not just emotion, this marigold is illusion. We have to, when Mahayana teachings, you will always hear that everything is illusion. This is got nothing to do with negation or rejection. We are not saying that it does not exist, it's only an illusion. This is very, very important. I think automatically when you hear that things are illusion, then people tend to interpret this as, okay, so it means it does not exist. It's kind of difficult to define, quite a fine point. It's a really fine point. What is the definition of illusion, SP, in your Parsi Indian mind? Parsis have a lot. Okay. Can you get a mic?
My understanding is that illusion is something that cannot be perceived by what we call valid cognition. So like if you were a magician and you suddenly produced a camel on the stage,
right,
that would be an illusion. Because none of the causes and conditions for a camel to exist, its functionality, none of it is fulfilled there.
Yes.
So it is some sort of an invalid. You have hypnotized us or you have given us something in our tea just now, which is why we see the camel. So the cognition is not valid. That would be an illusion.
Okay.
Whereas when you say marigold is an illusion, I guess what you are saying is it doesn't exist inherently from its own side. But it does exist. It does perform a function. You can smell it and it looks good.
Yes. And the point here, what I have to make is from a sublime being's point of view, see the camel, you see a camel because you have been, what do you call it?
Hypnotized.
Hypnotized. From the sublime being's point of view, you are seeing this marigold because you have been hypnotized by your emotion. So from this point of view, marigold is equally an illusion. But this is a very vast sort of definition of relative truth. We are talking about relative truth, isn't it? We are talking about relative truth. To define the relative truth, you have to. There are a few, what do you call it, qualifications, so to speak. One is commonly accepted phenomena. Isn't it? Like, we all see this as a marigold. But only human beings, though, not the other beings. We don't know what they see this as. So, for you and me, this is a valid relative truth. The other is the usage. Marigold, especially in India, has an amazing function. Marigold acts. Marigold is found in temples, in the marriage ceremonies. So it has a function. And due to this function, marigold also exists as a more valid relative truth. What happens if everybody sees the camel? And actually this camel has a function within that perception, then that camel also will become a valid relative truth. But of course, right now this camel will not function as an animal that could actually can be mounted and ride and use it that way. Okay, so when Buddhists say, and this is in the Charvakayana, Mahayana, and the Vajrayana, when Buddhists say emotions are illusion, does not mean that it does not exist, as in negation. And similarly, when the Tantric Buddhists say emotions it can exist as gene, as cell, as elements, does not mean that emotions, according to the Tantra, exist truly. Yes. Okay, any other question?
Rinpoche, thank you for this. My question is about rejecting bodhicitta. I had a couple aspects on that I was wondering. One is I had thought that actually upon taking the Bodhisattva vow, that's indelible over lifetimes. So that I was just I was wondering how you'd even do it. How would you even reject bodhicitta, assuming you wanted to?
Like with a ritual, like throwing the chalks.
But it's not. There's losing heart. And sinking and despair, and is that rejecting bodhicitta?
Not necessarily. I think rejection requires some sort of a ritual That's what I was saying. Okay, I shall, from this point onwards, abandon the bodhicitta intentionally.
Okay.
That's why the rituals are important, especially for people like you and me. The ritual actually creates a function.
Any ritual. I mean, a
Any
good ritual.
Or it doesn't matter. Just basic. The rituals always are important to make something more. What do you call it? Solid, I guess, if you like.
So
See, it's like this. Monk's vow. Let's say Prati Moksha vow, like Bhikshuni and Bhikshu vow, is based on physical. A monk, even though he does not have a wish to be disrobed, but with a very sober mind and wishing to steal more than a cost of a lunch. Okay, let's put it this way, because it's very difficult to sort of measure all this. If you are sober, you see something that can cost more than a worth of a lunch, and then you go there, you steal it, and you actually obtain whatever finally you have obtained in your hand, in your within your within your possession. You manage to possess whatever you are trying to steal. When that happens, even though you may not wish to be disrobed, you get disrobed, because it is a physical vow. You understand? That's how. Whereas Bodhisattva vow, Bodhicitta vow, as you said, it's a very mental. Okay, I should define. I should explain this more. So this is why a monk can die, and on the day when he dies, his monk's vow will discontinue. So in his next life, he has to take the vow again. He will. There is no like baby monk. You understand? Mm-hmm. That's what I'm. Now for the Bodhisattva vow continues, because it's a mental, it's not physical.
There's a ritual to Bodhisattva vows, though. Yeah.
Yes, there's a ritual to take the Bodhisattva vow, and the ritual to give up the Bodhisattva vow is very individual. As in the case of Dingnaga, like throwing the chalk, I guess you can do that. So even an attempt to doing it is supposedly very, very grave and supposedly not good. It's believed that Avalokiteshvara nearly gave up. And when he took the vow, Bodhisattva vow, he took a vow by saying that may I never give up this vow, and even if I attempt to take this vow, to give up this vow, may my head cracked into thousands of pieces. That's how he took that vow. These are all symbolic stories, by the way. And one time when he got so depressed about the amount of the samsaric beings that need to be enlightened, he lost his courage and nearly gave up the Bodhicitta vow, and his head cracked into thousands of pieces. And at that moment, his master, Amitabha, appeared and blessed them into 1,000 heads and renewed the Bodhisattva vow. So this is what Śāntideva was talking about. Only a sublime being, a Tathagata, can actually sort this kind of a grave mistake. So it's a very, very, very it's considered really one of the most hideous things one can do.
So just to, on a more ordinary level then, the process of losing heart, forgetting your Bodhisattva vow, that's just something you pick yourself up from again and again.
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, the process of losing heart,
Yes.
of just forgetting about being any kind of warrior whatsoever and sinking, that's just something you picked yourself up from again.
That's just you're struggling, right?
Yeah, okay. So that's
yeah, that's not necessarily giving up you, because you are not giving up. You are just losing your heart. There's no ritual involved, saying that I don't want to be Bodhisattva anymore. Probably you might say it as a reaction, even that still doesn't count.
Okay. Thank you.
Desire is sort of looked upon as an affliction, but in the context of aspiration for bodhicitta, isn't aspiration itself a sort of form of desire?
That's, I have said this morning, remember Śāntideva said there's one ignorance you are allowed to keep for the time being, and that's thinking there's the enlightenment.
As you mentioned that the being who is taken bodhisattva means his determination is to liberate or enlighten all beings. So can you focus on that, means beings on earth plane only or on the other universe also? And you shared that there is no such things like time and space. So
There's
how
no
much
such thing as?
time and space, or that much quantity of beings we have to enlighten. So is there any ending for that? Means that bodhisattva can ever be enlightened?
Okay. Let me explain this in two ways. Okay? And this is important. This is what I have been trying to tell this morning. For a bodhisattva, you need courage. Where do you get this courage from? You get the courage from knowing the truth. If you don't know the truth, you will never... If there is really a time, like endless time, endless sentient beings, truly existing time and truly existing quantity, yes, bodhisattva will definitely lose his or her courage. Because even to sort out one family or a friend's problem could, create despair, as we all experience. So, I don't need to mention about discouragement that we can go through by trying to enlighten all sentient beings. Okay? So, remember this. Ultimately, we need to know that there is no such thing as time. There is no such thing as space. There is no such thing as quantity, meaning all sentient beings. When we think in our very narrow, diluted mind, we make a distinction between one sentient being and all sentient beings. We tend to think, okay, one sentient being should be okay, I can handle that. But all sentient beings, that is too much. This is how we think. But in reality, there is no such thing as all and one, because those are both vague. This you have to actualize through contemplating on shunyata, through contemplating on the reality that things are just an illusion, etc., etc. But having that as your wisdom in the practice. And why do you practice? Why are you practicing? Because you are battling with your habitual pattern. Remember, that's the only reason why you are a practitioner. If there is no habit, there is no path. If there is no habit, there is no practice. There is no goal, there is no path, there is no discipline. So the reason why you are practicing is you are battling with a habit. So in order to wage war with a habit, you have to always, not always, there are many methods, supposedly more than 84,000 methods. And many of the Mahayana methods are in the form of thinking exactly the opposite of the normal habit, such as the Tonglen practice, as some of you may know. One of the Mahayana's practices, you take everybody's suffering as you breathe in, you give you take suffering of all, cause of the suffering of all. As you breathe out, you give all the virtue, happiness to others. There's that kind of mind training which will be taught by Śāntideva in this text. So on and so forth. Opposite of how we usually think and react. Usually we have the habit of only thinking about oneself, not the others. Happiness, gain, attention, comfort, praise, I want. Loss, unhappiness, being ignored is something that I don't want. So that kind of habit, to go to combat with that kind of habit, we have the opposite mind training. So you will hear, as a practice of the Bodhisattva path, you will hear, you have this mind training to think that my path has no end. My path of the Bodhisattva path has no end. Till all sentient beings are enlightened, my path has no end. I am practicing this not for my enlightenment, it is for the enlightenment of all sentient beings. All this mind training is valid. And these are, when I say again, mind training, it's not just a make-believe. It is, It is truism to the sense of, what I just said about the relative truth and ultimate truth. Okay? Any more?
But as Buddha said that before Gautama Buddha, there were a lot of Buddha were there, and after him also there were lot of Buddha will happen. So from so many years, there were so many beings who have taken vow of Bodhisattva. So as till a day, all beings are not enlightened, so still they exist. So is there any ending for this, or the Bodhisattva beings can be enlightened or not?
Very good question. When you are enlightened, for instance, when you are enlightened, you will never see even one. Okay, when you, let's say, when after your practice, finally, when you achieve enlightenment, for you, in your point of view, there won't be even one sentient being that is not enlightened. You got that? So, But for other sentient beings, okay, this is okay. So you are enlightened, but in your mind, no ordinary sentient being, no defiled beings. Let's say I am devoted to you. You understand? In my devotion, I will think that you have compassion to us ignorant sentient beings. But that is my perception. You understand? So I'm dividing you into two, basically. Your point of view and my point of view of your point of view. This is how, what do you call it? So, what I'm saying is that individually, for an enlightened person, there is no sentient beings that are not enlightened. So therefore, his or her practice of aspiration, practice of 6 parameters are not failed, if that's what you are trying to point out. But the sentient beings who are still not enlightened, for them, beings that are not enlightened still exist. Okay. Any more questions?
I wanted to ask a question regarding the root downfalls. So very often when we take the Bodhisattva vows, we're told about what we can and can't do. And in this particular text, Śāntideva talks about bodhicitta, but he doesn't, as far as I might be wrong, but as far as I remember the text, doesn't tell us about the vows and the downfalls and sort of the details that so often, at least Western practitioners get obsessed with.
Yes.
So here it's really just the juice of it, but not so much the rules. And I was wondering, because he did, I think in a later text, did specify what are these downfalls, but not.
Yes, he has only referred, in the text, he referred to read other texts as far as the sort of a list of what are the downfalls and what can, what can cause the breakage of the Bodhisattva vow. What I will do is I will summarize maybe one of this, maybe within this next few days, because it's quite the big subject in itself. But since you have asked the question, for now, Bodhisattvas are not allowed to do 3 things. Not allowed to have 3, 3 actions or mental actions, which is harmful thoughts. You see, because that's a contradictory to the Bodhisattva mind. Wanting to harm someone, it just is not allowed. And this mind to possess, wanting someone else's glory and wealth, covetousness, that's not allowed. And then wrong view. Now this is a big one. The wrong view is a very, very big one, because it's very abstract sometimes. So let's say, so find questions. Okay, let's make this even more difficult by making it more meticulous. Okay. You know, there is a school called Charvaka in India. Probably not so much anymore. But, you know, a lot of the modern thinking could be categorized as a Charvaka. A Charvaka, I believe, has contributed a lot to the Indian thinking in the past. When did the Charvaka exist? Was originated? Like during the Buddha's time, you would say? Before that? Before that, I think. It's a very, very, very sophisticated. It does not believe in rebirth. It does not believe in rebirth. It does not believe in karma. Let's say karma in the sense of, you know, like, it of course believes that if you plant marigold, marigold will come on that level. But it does not believe in cause and effect, that what Hindus and Buddhists talk about. It does not believe in rebirth. I've said this. So therefore, it does not believe in a lot of virtuous and non-virtuous actions that are explained in the Hindu scripture or the Buddhist scriptures. So it's a very sophisticated, it's a really, really sophisticated system. Now, if you were to ask me, can a person be a bodhisattva and follow the Charvaka view? Okay, that is the question. Then this is the answer. If this bodhisattva is adopting Charvaka path to enlighten some other beings, fine, he can do whatever he likes. You understand? If he does this to enlighten other sentient beings, he can do that. But it is a contradictory to follow the Charvaka path and Bodhisattva path for himself, for his own, as his own path. It is a contradictory. Why? Because Bodhisattva path is a path of non-duality. Charvaka path is not a path of non-duality. Anyway, that's our imputed, of course, I'm sure they would say that our way is the Madhyamika way, but Charvaka way is a nihilistic view. Charvaka does not believe in rebirth. And probably this is not the right time to discuss, but you will be very surprised that even among the Buddhists today, and I'm again getting carried away here, and I promise I will not get carried away this time. There are Buddhists, especially in England and especially in America, who claim themselves as a Buddhist, but they refuse to accept the notion of rebirth. If they do not refuse outrightly, at least they will shy away from talking about it. Of course, the Tibetan whole phenomena of reincarnate tulkus and all of this is not helping the cause at all, because that's just making it more sort of murky and very, cultish, etc. But if you really don't believe in the reincarnation, the whole that system that I explained earlier about three ignorance, three emotions, remember the samsaric cyclic existence, that will fall apart. Remember the defilements of the ignorance, the emotion of karma, emotion of rebirth, that whole machine will collapse. Then the problem is whether you are a gangster, whether you are a thief, whether you are a monk, whether you are a meditator, Doesn't make any difference. We are all going to die, and when we die, we will just become parts of the atoms, part of the universe. There's no next life. So why we even follow a spiritual path? So, it is, for me, it is shocking when I face those who claim that they are Buddhist, but they don't believe in reincarnation. That's a contradiction. So here, if you were to ask me, can a person follow Charvaka and be Bodhisattva for his or her own spiritual growth? No. But if he or she is needing to do this to benefit others, by all means, I shall encourage this person to do it. Okay?
Rinpoche, there's a question which is related to what you've said just now. Now, while reading Pali scriptures, Theravada scriptures, for example, there's a sutta in Majjhima Nikaya. There, the Buddha says that it's better, of course, if you they say that yes, for me there is a next world and next life, and it's okay if you believe it. But he says that still, even if you don't believe, still there is a virtue in acting morally and taking all the, following all the precepts and so on. And he says, so for the one who does not really have an experience of the life after death or the other world, he does not really need to believe it, because then that will be, in a way, you are sort of claiming what you don't really experience. Mm-hmm. And there he rather suggests that okay, but you can still act morally, and he says still it will be a good thing, because then you will be doing good to others, and then you will have praise in this life. And he says, and at all, if there is a next life, that will be a bonus. Yes. So the Buddha actually in his own teaching, what I see is leaves scope for people to either to believe in the next life or not to believe. And even he said the same thing in the Kesaputta Sutta of Anguttara Nikaya. Mm-hmm. So you need not really start with this belief in the next life or life after death, and still you can be a Buddhist.
Yes, of course. Yeah? Definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Are you finished?
Maybe I'll just put my second question also, which is connected. So with regard to your earlier answers to the question of Bodhisattva, so do you ultimately want to say that it is then the Bodhisattva practice ultimately a individualist practice, though it involves sort of enlightenment of other beings? That's what the vow says. But ultimately, I would say that when the person becomes enlightened, for him everybody else also is enlightened. Mm-hmm. So then, is it ultimately an individualist practice and not a social one, as it sort of appears prima facie?
Okay. Please remind me the second question. If I, in the midst of answering the first question, if I forget, because both of these questions are very, very important. Yes. Buddha said a lot of different things in lot of different occasions. There's even one very famous account called what we call Lungma Tenji Tawa Chipshi, the 14 unanswered questions. Now, of course, there's a different interpretations of this. The very fact of him not answering to many interpreter or a commentator is a teaching. That in itself is, an answer. And within these 14 different questions exists these particular questions, whether there is a beginning of the samsara or not, whether there is a soul or not, so on and so forth. In a certain sutra, within the very similar, within the same yana, I can even say that. If I'm combining all the yanas, of course, then there's so many different, sutras and so many different answers. But even within one vehicle, Buddha said different things. In certain vehicles, Buddha said, when I was a rabbit, when I was a deer, when I was a peacock, as if there is a being that got reincarnated as the Buddha after 500 lifetimes, so on and so forth. Then there's other sutras where, within the same Vihana we are talking here, where he talks about how soul, self, all of these are like an illusion, like a bubble, like a dew, they like a rainbow, like a mirage. They only exist within the context of appearance, but they do not have any solid, inherently existing nature. Okay? I'd like to, this is a very important question. First of all, even in the Mahayana Sutra, when we read a sutra such as a sutra such as Prajna Paramita Siddha Sutra, you will know Gashi Sebi Pardaya Medo, all that, if you read the Heart Sutra, you will know. Buddhists don't believe in reincarnation in the ultimate sense. No, not at all. Forget reincarnation. Buddhists do not even believe enlightenment exists in truly as an independent, inherently existing phenomena. Buddhists don't believe in things that exist truly at all. This is within the Mahayana. Only on the relative level. If you talk about a relative level, you have to talk about cause and effect. So, okay, how should I? This is such a vast subject. If one exaggerates within the ultimate, as a philosopher, and as how to define a perfect path? Let's discuss this. How to define a path as a perfect path? A path has to be free from two kinds of fault. In this path, ultimately, one should be free from exaggeration. And relatively, one should be free from underestimation. So, we cannot say relatively reincarnation does not exist. In the relative field, we cannot say something exists or something does not exist as a result of religious or theoretical analysis. We cannot. We have to accept, for instance, we have a head on our neck, and if we analyze, scientifically, the whole notion of the head will fall apart. But on the relative level, if your head gets cold, even a scientist would say, scientist who completely believes that a head is, conglomeration of atoms and veins and, genes and DNA. Even a scientist will say, I want to wear a hat because I'm cold, my head is cold. So on the relative level, if you don't have that kind of imputed phenomena, you cannot build a path. I don't think there's any sutras where where Buddha said, you have to believe in reincarnation before you start the path. My refutation is some Buddhists who singling out reincarnation and trying to say this is not the Buddha's teaching. They have a big task. They have a big job to answer the relative questions. Am I making it clear? Where's my...
Yeah.
Do you like to clarify something based on what I've just said?
No, I got your point.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay, the second one. What was the second one?
No, the second one was as you said, the Bodhisattva when he becomes enlightened, all sentient beings are enlightened for him. So then my question is then usually what we feel is this Bodhisattva practice is more like appears like a social practice where you're trying to help everyone and try to enlightenment of others. But ultimately then is it just an individualistic practice?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. Yeah, ultimately, okay, now this is a territory I've never been, so I can only sort of hypothetically speak this one. Ultimately, we are told that there is not even the self that is getting enlightenment, remember? So we have to go beyond self and other anyway. But again, going back to the relative, relatively, when we practice, it's like this. A path that begins with this notion that I want to be enlightened, and not including all sentient beings, have a much less capacity of non-duality, because it is really the teaching of non-duality. Yes, okay, my answer is yes. It is a very big, skillful system of mind training. But how is our mind being trained? For what kind of mind training? Mind training to actualize non-duality. And in this case, what kind of non-duality? Non-duality of self and other. So a path beginning with only thinking about ourself, myself, individual, has a less capacity to chew and digest the vastness of the non-duality. Whereas, see, even when we talk about compassion, we talk about empathy, like the Śāntideva will put it, to really understand how one would feel is basic. In other words, to really put one's foot in someone else's shoes and trying to see others' point of view. Basically what I'm saying is yes, but the purpose is to actualize the non-duality. Am I clear here?
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
That's a really important question, actually. It's a very philosophical question. I just realized it's Professor Duker.
Rinpoche, you explain in the Bodhisattva that the 9th chapter is meant to be the ground to all the other paramitas. In the same way, in other texts, they explain how before you have any sort of realization, you shouldn't go out there and try to help people.
Yes.
So as a practical advice, if one is inspired by Buddhism from a mundane level and suddenly has the aspiration to be of benefit to others, would there be any sense to try to do it before having one achieved a certain type of understanding of the ultimate truth?
As it is stated in the second and the third chapter, Śāntideva strongly encourages us to follow the Bodhisattva path step by step. And also in other Buddhist, Mahayana Buddhist Mahayana Shastras, Shāntideva, strongly encourages us to follow the Bodhisattva path step by step. And also in other Buddhist, Mahayana Buddhist Shastras, Mahayana Shastras, Mahayana Shastras many masters of the past have also encouraged never to engage into extreme, seemingly extreme activities such as giving your own limb to a hungry tiger until you have tasted the non-duality, at least in a generic form. Because this could cause the discouragement of a young bodhisattva. So for the young bodhisattva, mind training and aspiration and shamatha, vipassana, these are very much encouraged.
So my question would be, as a practical advice to people living in our conditions or our age, if you had to say like a generic answer for the public, what would be your personal advice if one genuinely wants to pursue this path?
Aspiration. It is. Really, the aspiration is, in the bodhicitta, to make us understand the bodhicitta easier, bodhicitta is divided into ultimate and relative bodhicitta. Yeah? And the relative bodhicitta is also divided into what we call application and aspiration. Application meaning like a 6 paramitas. But that's already difficult for us to give maybe a lunch or some breads, hungry dogs, a day or two, month or two, without any expectations of wagging the tail. All that is, even that is difficult. But every day is going to be difficult. So, aspiration. So here, let me put it this way. A genuine Mahayana follower, and I have met some of these people who are really trying to follow the Mahayana path. This kind of person, if this kind of person is given a chance to build a hospital that could really help probably several 100,000 people, okay, give that chance to this person. And he has other choice. The other choice is that he has 6 months of condition to practice the aspiration bodhicitta. He will only do aspiration. Okay? He will recite aspiration and he will really try to think of this aspiration. A genuine Mahayana practitioners will most likely choose the second one. Because the first one, he will be very afraid. Because especially if he's a young bodhisattva, he will think, I may, build a hospital. And if I'm lucky, hospital might not work. If I'm unlucky, hospital will become so successful. And this might attract a lot of attention and a lot of publicity. And I might become famous. And then people will like to get my autograph, pictures taken with. And this might lure my ego into building second hospitals. And then all the spiritual materialism may arise. This is how a genuine follower of the Mahayana path may think. Very, very rare, very, very rare. I have met, maybe not to this extent, but I have met practitioners who has the access to do a lot of so-called, social, activities, but who opt to just, at glance, from an ordinary point of view, you will think he's so selfish. He should be building hospitals. Instead, he's now in the Himalayas, inside a very nice, quiet, near a waterfall, looking at a snow-capped mountain, fresh air. He's sitting there 12 hours a day, just mumbling prayers after prayers. But if you are a genuine Mahayana practitioners, this may be more likely. Did I answer your question? Yes. Okay. Okay, so before we end for today, I'm going to now go through the stanzas once again. Okay, so now we begin to talk about discipline. I guess you can call it ethic. And in Buddhism, in Mahayana Buddhism, also in other Charvakayana and the Vajrayana, we talk about 3 kinds of discipline. Discipline or practice, I guess. A discipline of morality, or the practice of morality, practice of samadhi, and practice of wisdom. And again, wisdom being the most important. And morality and the samadhi or meditation as tools to enhance, actualize, and strengthen the discipline of wisdom. Of all the, so whatever discipline, if you wish to participate with whatever discipline, first and most importantly, you should guard your mind. Because if you do not guard your mind, then no matter what kind of discipline, you will not be able to uphold. If you let go this elephant, mad elephant-like mind, this mad mind will only lead us to hell. Even so, with a mindfulness, with a rope of mindfulness, it is important to tie and bound this mind that is like elephant-like. If you can do that, all fear will pacify and all virtue will come into our hand effortlessly. If you want to conquer external hostile situations such as tiger, lion, snakes, or hell's guardian, the only way to overcome these hostile hostile forces is through subdue and tame this mind. Because all this fear and the suffering, they all come from the mind, such is said by the Tathagata. And this next stanza is what I was talking earlier. For who? Hell realm, the burning iron, the burning weapons, sharp weapons, fire, the fire in the hell. For who? Or who did created these phenomenon of hell realm? Where did the hell's guardian arise from? Tathagata have said, all this exists within your mind, that they do not exist externally. In the three worlds, there's nothing that is fearsome than the mind. And then the next few stanzas really accentuates the quintessence of what some of the parameters, some of the the Mahayana Bodhisattvas practice generosity, and many of these stanzas will answer many of the questions that you have been asking. For instance, here talk about perfection of generosity. How do you define perfection of generosity? If a perfection of the generosity is measured by having made all the destitute and poor, having how should I put this? If the perfection of the generosity is measured through the achievement, such as being able to make all the beggars or the destitute people cease to exist, then, just as somebody asked the question earlier, how can we say that the Buddhas of the past have perfected their generosity? Because even today we see lots of beggars, lots of hungry people roaming around in the street. But so, therefore, the perfection of the generosity is defined or qualified by or measured by having this mind of giving, mind of letting go. Once you have this mind of letting everything go, then that is how we define the perfection of generosity. Therefore, here again, taming and training the mind alone will define the action of generosity. Similarly, how do we define somebody is perfect with morality? If the morality is defined, morality or ethic or discipline is measured by managing to secure all these beings like fish into a territory where they will not be harmed, then again one can never achieve the perfection of morality or discipline. But therefore, the perfection of discipline is measured by having pongsam, this mind of not harming, generating the habit or the mind of not harming others. Once you develop that, then the perfection of the discipline is accomplished. How do we define patience? We cannot define the patience by overcoming all the hostile forces. Therefore, we define the patience by overcoming one's own aggression. Like, for instance, we cannot make the whole earth soft and smooth, but just by wearing shoes, it is equal to making whole earth smooth and soft. There are so many hostile forces on this earth. It is endless to overcome them one by one. The only thing that need to be overcome is the mind, and through overcoming this single mind of one's own, it is equal to overcome all the hostile forces on this earth. And then samadhi. Samadhi, or the one-pointed concentration, is the most supreme act. It is believed that even a single moment of one-pointedness, one-pointedness or the concentration can give birth to the state of Brahma. If we recite mantras, sutras, or if we go through practice of ascetic practice, no matter for how long, if we do it with a distracted mind, Tathagata have said, it is pointless. It is important to realize the secret of this mind. Until the secret of mind is discovered, no matter how much we desire for the happiness, and no matter how much we want to overcome the suffering, we will roam around in this samsara aimlessly. So therefore, apart from discipline of guarding the mind, a bodhisattva does not require any other ascetic practices. When the bodhisattva is roaming in the crowd, always be mindful and guard this mind as how we would guard our wound when we roam around in the crowd. We guard our small wound because if we don't, it could create pain. If we don't guard our mind, it could lead to much bigger pain, such as hell realm. Guarding the mind is the supreme most discipline. if a bodhisattva guards his mind, no matter where the bodhisattva is dwelling, in a rowdy situations, and among the women, the bodhisattva will not lose the discipline. And here I have to just briefly tell you, we have to remember there's no, what do you call it, a personal grudge with a woman here. It's just that Śāntideva was talking to a bunch of monks in Nalanda. This whole text was caused because of some monks who actually wanted to make a mockery of Śāntideva because they thought he need to be, what do you call it, they wanted to make fun of him. And he was forced to teach because earlier he was only seen sleeping and roaming around, never studying, never meditating. And the other studious, disciplined monks thought this is not right because he gets all the privilege as all the other monks, whereas he doesn't even have to work hard. So they all sort of set up they set up this some sort of a trap where he had no choice but to teach. All along they thought he was really a lazy, sort of good for nothing, until that day when he was forced to teach. He taught the Bodhicharyavatara, which is basically a sort of recitation of all his notes that he made when he was studying in the Nalanda University. So I just want to give you this context. You will hear maybe one or two more comments like this because he was talking to the group of monks. It is acceptable even if we don't have favorable cause and condition for our body, such as food. It is okay, it is acceptable if we cannot engage into virtuous actions, other virtuous actions, but one bodhisattva must always think that it is unacceptable if a situation arises where your mind cannot be guarded. I, Śāntideva, will fold my palms together and beseech the future follower of the Bodhisattva path that mindfulness and alertness must always be guarded like a life. The effect of a person who is not well, who is sick, is very weak. Whatever the endeavor of a person who is sick has no effect, or the effect is very weak. Likewise, if our mind is not guarded, then our mind is ailed. Therefore, our actions will not have right effect, or even if we do have right effect, it will be weak. If we don't have a mindfulness, no matter what kind of hearing and contemplation we have, like a jar that has a hole beneath, all this training will not remain in the mind stream of this person. Even those who are learned, those who have heard a lot of teachings, and those who are devoted, many times if they are lacking the mindfulness, their path will always be stained by downfall. If one has no mindfulness, then the tendency to be robbed by emotion is much higher. Our emotions, defilements, are like thieves and robbers. They are all waiting there for the right time to rob us from all our virtue. If given the chance, defilements and emotions can even destroy the life force of the higher birth, meaning virtuous actions. Therefore, a bodhisattva must never let go mindfulness, even for a moment. And even though the young bodhisattvas initially experience the distracted mind, again and again, remembering the suffering of the samsara, a young bodhisattva must invoke the mindfulness. It is advisable for the young bodhisattvas to accompany virtuous friends, masters, because our masters will always remind us our fault. Master will remind us the downfall of the samsara. And therefore, through out of respect and out of fear to the samsara, mindfulness will occur easily. If one is not if one doesn't have the opportunity to be with our master at all time, then one must remember that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have omniscience. In the presence of these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, I am residing at all times. In the presence of these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, if it is shameful and immoral to act without mindfulness. In this way, one must try to invoke mindfulness. This kind of method is advisable because this kind of method not only brings mindfulness, but it also is an act of remembering the Buddha and the dharma. When the mindfulness is again and again invoked, then alertness will also come. Again and again invoking the mindfulness, and when the mind, our habitual mind begins to, when the habitual mind wishes to plunge into the old habit, remembering with the mindfulness, with the remembrance, immediately one must try to remain like a log, a tree. the next stanzas, you know, some of you may be familiar with Vipassana. Nowadays, when we talk about Vipassana, it's almost automatically understood as sitting on a meditation cushion and sitting straight, occasionally with a walking meditation, but mostly sitting straight, hours and hours. As part of the Vipassana, I'm sure those who have been to the Vipassana courses, you will remember, as part of the Vipassana, there's a technique of being mindful of our body, not the feeling, but just the presence, just its structure, just its presence, its sort of its shape, its frame, often as simple as the frame, the fact that we are sitting. This kind of confinement method is very popular among the Vipassana practitioner. I'm telling you this because the next few stanzas, even though you will hear it as some sort of a monastic discipline, actually it is a very much Vipassana training. So, for instance, he said here, never we should look at things without a purpose. When we look at things, we should look at them with a gentle and sort of gentle manner, sort of almost like looking, the attitude of looking in a very humble way. And at times, to rest ourselves from this kind of concentration, you are allowed to look at different direction. If you encounter somebody, you should greet them with the gentle words. And when you are walking along on the path alone in a forest, it is advised to look at a different direction to be sure that there is no danger. When you rest, you should look to the direction from where you came. Again and again, you should look at the front and the back. Again, here in these stanzas. And when you rest, or sometimes when you just look at the body and see its frame, its function, we are literally talking about how we just watch like, okay, so my hand has these fingers, I have this skin, the shape, the color, just being aware of that. In order to train and tame our mind, that is like a mad elephant, we must try to apply all possible methods. At times, if you are in a situation like festivals, like parties, or if you are in but chaotic situations like flood or earthquake, of course, it is understandable for a young bodhisattvas to not being able to maintain this kind of mindfulness. Or also, when we apply other bodhisattva activities such as generosity, the Buddha has advised that for the younger bodhisattvas, in this kind of situation, we can relax with the other paramitas. A young bodhisattva must refrain from getting distracted by all kinds of trivial, useless gossips, stories, shows. And even if the young bodhisattva cannot avoid this situation, try to lesser the attachment to these activities. Without digging earth, without a proper, without a purpose, cutting grass, drawing on the ground. When the bodhisattvas begin to do this, immediately bodhisattva should stop by remembering the words of the Buddha. Again, this is specifically talking to the monks mainly. When a bodhisattva is wanting to move and walk, when the bodhisattva is wanting to speak, always try to precede it with mindfulness. If your mind is filled with desire or aggression, then a bodhisattva should remain as a log without reacting to actions such as walking or talking. When the bodhisattva begins to desire for laughter or fishing for praise, or when the bodhisattva wishes to criticize someone else, or when the bodhisattva wishes to make someone else experience sadness or lure them, or when the bodhisattva is fishing for praise, or when the bodhisattva wishes to criticize others, at that point the bodhisattva must remain as a log of a tree or a piece of wood. These are all in the mindfulness, mindfulness instruction. When the bodhisattva wants to be wild, when the bodhisattva begins to be robbed by a sectarian mind of partiality, when the bodhisattva wishes to be lazy and lethargic, at that point the bodhisattva must remain as log. I think I will stop here, stop at this point for today.